Hey everyone, it's Ivan, kitbadger.com, here today to relate a recent misadventure and a near miss that probably would have left me crippled, if not dead. One of the things I like to do with Kit Badger is film in cool locations. Neither myself nor probably anyone else cares what color the carpet is in my living room. To that end, it's a matter of how big of a production it is. Whether it's a smaller production because it's somewhere relatively close, or it's a big production because it's somewhere far. So backing up this last summer, as of 2018, I ended up going with one of my good friends, Matt from Jerking the Trigger, and we ended up getting together and going and exploring and summiting Strawberry Mountain. Really cool peak, not super high, pretty accessible, but beautiful spot. Views all the way out over Lake Pend Oreille, and I'm like, man, I want to come back up here and film. So didn't get a chance to. Finally, fast forward to early December 2018, and I'm like, you know what? I want to head up there and do some filming. Keep in mind, most everything I do, it's a calculated risk. So to that end, like, hey, how far back am I going? Have I ever been there before? What kind of comm plan do I have? And while the hike isn't crazy, it's about 5 miles. It is a trail I've already been on, and weather-wise, wasn't expecting it to be too bad. I knew it'd be kind of partly cloudy, and I knew a while back we had some snow, but since then we had a number of nice sunny days, and I really wasn't expecting that much snow given where my location is. Granted, this is about 60 miles north of where I am, but I talked about it with my buddy Matt, set up a comm plan. I was like, hey, I'm gonna go up there. Do you wanna go with me? He's like, I can't. I'm like, okay, well, here's my plan. Got to the trailhead, sent him a text. I'm like, hey, I'm about to step off. I'll let you know when I get to the top. Strawberry Mountain happens to be one of those places where you happen to have cell service up there, which is pretty cool. And so, again, going back to that calculated risk, would I have gone on an adventure this late in the year, way back up in the mountains where I had no reception or anything? Probably not. It's one of those calculated risks. So got to the trailhead, again, big production because camping in wintertime, all of your layers, by myself, so I don't get to share the weight of the tent, cook gear, anything like that. And on top of that, camera gear, tripod, camera, and going up there to create content. So 2 weapon systems, Honey Badger, as well as my little SBR from Criterion barrels. So loaded down, got my pack on, started at it. 15 minutes into it, I got to a spot that honestly could have ended the trip right there. Strawberry Creek flows through. Again, had been there kind of late summer, it was pretty low, and this time of year was actually higher, not because there was a bunch of rain or because of a bunch of snow melt necessarily, but there was snow on the ground, and with being as cold as it is up there, there's basically all these snow dams, which effectively raise the level. So using my rifle as a walking stick and loaded down with this, carefully made my way across, managing to not break through the ice or just fall in, which obviously would have ended the trip right there. Got across that obstacle, started heading up, and gradually kind of more and more snow on the ground. Tons of snowshoe hair prints everywhere, and then eventually came across some mountain lion tracks, some pretty good sized ones, and I'm kind of got my rifle looking around up in trees, especially through these like narrow, super low visibility places, but started heading further and further up. Eventually the snow was getting thicker and thicker, or deeper and deeper rather, and I was like, you know what, there's going to be a lot of snow up there. And foolishly, I did not plan on that. I figured it would probably be some snow and it would probably be packed, kind of icy if anything, and I didn't bring my gaiters. So as I went further and further up, the snow got deeper and deeper. There I was in this beautiful winter wonderland, and I'm like, damn, my feet are getting wet. I had nice warm insulated pants, and I had some good knee-high, like merino wool socks, Gore-Tex Solomon boots. It was doing good, but started post-holing, like probably the last hour. and I was following these giant like monster elk tracks that happened to be on the trail and trying to stay on them. I couldn't stay on top of the snow because of how heavy the pack was and everything. So I'm post holing, and every time I lift my foot up, or as my foot goes down, punches through, my pant leg lifts up, and then as I pull my foot out, basically the top of my boot scrapes a bunch of snow and it starts packing around essentially the top of my boot. So I finally get up there after post holing through the snow for probably like the last hour. And at this point, I had intended on making a fire up there. Looking around, I'm like, no. While I could, one, either backtrack, which I'm like, I'm not gonna go back down to come back up. I could either backtrack down to a lower place where I could find firewood, or I could expend a lot of time finding firewood where I was at, like really having to dig for it to find dry stuff. But I was like, you know what? I've been going this whole time on bulletproof coffee. I'm hungry. I'm gonna go ahead and set up my tent, take stock, and figure it out from there. So I set my tent up. With my tent set up, finally eating some beef jerky, took out my phone, called my buddy Matt, put him on speakerphone, started chewing on some jerky. I'm like, Matt, there's a lot of snow up here. And started talking through it with him. And as I was talking to him, I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna be able to dry my boots out. So one, it's already somewhere after noon. Took me almost 4 hours to get up there. So maybe about 3 hours left of sunlight before the sun sets. So I'm like, I can either spend that time, the lion's share of that time, trying to find firewood up here, which will be a monumentous effort to basically build a fire. Even then, I'm probably not gonna get my boots dried out. So where does that leave me? I'm obviously not gonna stand around and film with wet boots. I will freeze to death. And if they're all wet and I can't get them dry, I'm not gonna film the next morning. The plan was to basically film that next morning before hiking down. Well, not gonna happen. I'm not gonna put on frozen boots in the morning and try and film for a couple hours before hiking down. So immediately it becomes self-evident that what I need to do is go ahead and pack up my tent, cut bait, and hike back down. The hike back down obviously went much quicker, but I knew I was probably going to end up cooling off as I was going down, so I wanted to layer up, put all my warming layers on, nice big thick warm gloves, beanie, down jacket, all that stuff, got my pack loader back on, headed down. And obviously it went faster. Eventually my feet did warm up and I could feel them basically squishing with every step. And while I was coming up, I'd been drinking out of my hydration bladder because I need to carry a bunch of water up there. One of the reasons is there's no water source up the top of Strawberry Mountain. While I knew there might be snow, I didn't want to, one, rely on it, and two, be forced to melt it. So on top of like a 2.5 liter hydration bladder, I also had a 3 liter Nalgene canteen, like collapsible one. So my hydration bladder, getting up to the top and then starting down, basically the entire line froze. So when I wanted something to drink, had to drink out of the Nalgene canteen, which was inside my backpack. Keep hiking down, eventually come across some really big mountain lion prints. I'm like, man, I don't know if these are new or if I missed them on the way up, but keep heading down. Finally get back down to that creek crossing. I'm like, one, I don't want to fall in and soak myself. Two, I also recognize I'm about 15 minutes from my vehicle. So what I don't want to do is spend 20 minutes trying to safely negotiate this at the same time. Decision was made for me, like first step onto the ice, broke through, and I'm like, all right, I'm committed. And basically walked through this probably like calf deep, snow-fed stream, breaking through ice as I went. got across it, got back up to my vehicle, stripped down, and went ahead and threw on my like town clothes. Everything is thin, nothing really insulated, but stuff that was dry, to include my Limbs Primal 2 little minimalist shoes, no insulation whatsoever. Put all that stuff on, dropped my pack, sent Matt another message, and I'm like, hey, I made it back to my car. Do you mind putting some coffee on? I figured go by, hang out, drink some coffee. By now it's already like 3:45, the sun's pretty much setting. And I'm like, I'll go hang out a little bit and eventually drive myself back home. About an hour and a half drive south. So send that text, hop in my car, turn around and start heading down the mountain. At this point, disaster's pretty much averted, right? Down, I'm off the mountain. I'm not gonna be a hypothermia casualty up on this mountainside. And again, calculated risks. I wanted to get up there. I wanted to make it work. I got up there. I made the right decision. I'm like, this isn't gonna happen. Yeah, I had everything. I could easily stay the night up there, and it would have been like the longest night of my life. The sun was gonna set at like 3:45, and it was gonna rise probably around 7:45, 8 o'clock the next morning. Would have been a long night in the dark, just hanging out in my tent, in my sleeping bag, staying cozy. But made the right decision. So started driving down, and I was coming down the pass. It was a pass. Basically coming down the pass, and there was a section on the way up that as I started to get into the snow line, I was like, man, I'm starting to lose traction a little bit, put it in 4 high. So as I'm driving down, I'm eating beef jerky, and I'm coming down, starting to get a little steep, and I'm like, I should probably slow down a little bit, like heading down this pass. Going about 20, 25 miles an hour. As I start to come around the turn, lose all traction, done, and just start sliding. I put as much input as I was comfortable putting into it. I didn't want to crank the wheel and go into a like more exaggerated, like uncontrolled spin skid across this ice, and continued eating beef jerky. For whatever reason, I was like, you know what, it's out of my hands at this point. And I'm sliding along. It's this 1-lane road, really steep on this side, consequently, really steep on the downhill side. For a minute there, I thought my wheels were gonna catch, and I'm like, oh man, they're starting to catch. I'm starting to get pulled like back onto the road some. Came too far. Back in, slipped out. The whole time I'm kind of looking down, again, calculating, being like, I wonder how this is gonna work out for me right here. Back in, came around, went straight down. Like, again, really, really steep mountainside. Boom! Get stopped by these 3 trees growing up right there. Bam! As far as the ways you can crash, crashing in reverse, pretty much the best way possible. Your entire body's just pushed back into the headrest, into your seat, everything like that. Of course, everything in my vehicle goes flying back, blows the back window out, and there I am, stopped. Immediately take stock of myself physically and look around. I didn't have my phone on my person, everything shifted. Managed to find it, look, fortunate enough to have service. I call up Matt. I'm like, hey Matt, long story short, my vehicle went off the road. I'm okay. It's not recoverable. I just need you to come up here as soon as you can and pick me up, and we'll figure it out from there. He's like, okay, I'll be right there. So here I am in my like street clothes, sun's down. All of my like warm clothes are wet at this point, to include my boots. And granted, I have all my winter like backpacking stuff in there. Like, I'm not gonna get my tin out or anything like that though. So one of the things I do keep in my vehicle is my Kifaru Whoopie. I grab that, put my warm gloves back on, throw my beanie on, zip up my jacket. Again, wearing my Limbs Primal 2. So I look over, take my youngest son's booster seat, climb out of the vehicle. This is so steep at this point, I have to basically kind of hang on to the vehicle and climb up the vehicle. Because one, there's a little bit of snow, but the ground is frozen. This whole section through here basically never sees sun, and it's ice. So I managed to make it up to the top, get back up to the road. At this point, don't want to be cold. Take my whoopee, get all nice and wrapped up, throw my son's booster seat on the ground, stand on it to insulate myself. So I'm not gonna have all my warmth sucked out through my feet. And I'm sitting there, again, taking stock, recognizing basically how fortuitous it was that I went over in the way that I did with respect to my vehicle. Pretty much a couple feet to either side, would have missed this clump of trees. The trees back earlier, like earlier on the turn where I started to slide, smaller, more spread out. And just past these 3 trees was basically a huge open section that went another 30 yards down the hill, incredibly steep, before ultimately something large and significant that would have stopped my very fast acceleration at that point. So stood there as cozy as I could be and waited. Eventually Matt got there. I told Matt, I was like, hey, drive slow, it's super slick, I'll see you when you get here. So he comes cruising up really slow, passes me so that he could go right up above me, and makes this like 7-point turn. Again, really cautious, comes back down to pick me up. As he's coming parallel with me, he applies his brakes, immediately loses all control, just starts sliding straight over into the mountainside, basically this little drainage ditch. Promptly gets stuck. That's how slick it was. So at this point, we spend probably the next like 10 minutes or so managing to get his vehicle unstuck. Once it gets unstuck back on the road, I hop in, we head down. Get back to his house, have an amazing meal of nice, hearty, like thick, hot soup. Have some warm cider. Also have a cup of coffee. I'm on the phone with the insurance company to get a tow truck out there to recover my vehicle. Long story short, while we're there, sheriff's office comes by. One of the deputies comes out. He's like, hey, are you Ivan Loomis? I'm like, yeah. He's like, got a report of, I'm like, hey, sorry I didn't call that in. He's like, no problem, just want to make sure you're okay. I'm like, all right, good to go. Eventually the truck driver gets there. We're driving up there. I hop in with him, go up there, try and recover my vehicle. Because of how my vehicle came to rest, the recovery effort was challenging. Basically, to get my vehicle up, it needed to come up at a 90-degree angle to the road. In addition to that, the road was only big enough for a vehicle as far as the width. It's a 1-lane road. So he ended up having to get his vehicle, run cable up through a pulley from a tree back down to my vehicle, as well as another cable to my vehicle, and basically work these 2 cables one at a time, pulling my vehicle up. Mind you, my job during this was to make sure that tree didn't come down that the cable was attached to, in addition to, making sure it didn't come down on my vehicle or us in his vehicle. So while this is happening, he's working the cables, slowly winching this thing up. His vehicle is getting pulled by the weight of my vehicle trying to come up this, again, because it's so steep, eventually get my vehicle up, at which point we've pulled his vehicle with chocks, brake set, everything like that, over into the ditch, at which point his vehicle is now stuck. He managed to chain up his tires, gets himself out of there. We get both vehicles safely up, turn around, head back down the mountain. The entire experience ended in honestly the best possible way it could have. Myself, again, with respect to my vehicle, losing all control, hitting that ice, so much ice that my buddy Matt, who came to rescue me, he ended up getting stuck. The recovery tow truck vehicle got stuck. Like, it was a bad spot. And if I'd gone off the road sooner, probably would have rolled. Maybe would have stopped on one of those younger, smaller trees, or not. And maybe what would have stopped me was myself in between the tree and the vehicle over basically the driver's compartment. Or if I'd gone further and missed those 3 trees, probably about 2 or 3 feet to either side. Would have been another 30 yards down that hill, which would have been a lot of speed and momentum. Who knows how that would have ended as well. Not to mention I lucked out with having cell coverage. Again, worked out the best possible way, and myself absolutely comfortable in my abilities, whether it's physical abilities or martial abilities. I'm comfortable in all those, but at the end of the day, there are accidents, which by definition are unplanned for and outside of one's control. Through the entire experience, lots of takeaways. I'm going to direct you over to Jerking the Trigger. Matt actually did a really great article, little write-up on both his as well as my perspective and all the takeaways for us throughout the entire misadventure. But coming away from it, I'm incredibly grateful, feel blessed that it didn't go a different direction. And hopefully this, on some level, will be helpful to someone out there. But as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Down, and some are free. But I know that I'm married to the sea. It's about everything without being killed.